Amelia Earhart was not just a pilot. She was a symbol of courage, freedom, and the limitless potential of human determination. Born on July 24th, 1897, in Atchison, Kansas, Amelia grew up in a time when women were still expected to remain within the boundaries of domestic life. But Amelia was different. From a young age, she sought adventure. She climbed trees, shot rats with a .22 rifle, and kept a scrapbook of successful women who broke barriers in fields dominated by men. These early traits foreshadowed the extraordinary woman she would become. Her first encounter with aviation came in 1920, when she attended a flying exhibition in Long Beach, California. For Amelia, that moment was transformative. She later described it as if something had opened within her. The very next day, she arranged her first flying lesson with female aviator Nita Snook. From that moment, Amelia knew her life would be dedicated to the skies. In 1921, Amelia purchased her first plane, a bright yellow Kenner Airster, which she affectionately called the Canary. This modest aircraft carried her into history as she set her first records, becoming the first woman to rise to an altitude of 14,000 feet. Her passion and skill soon propelled her into the public eye, at a time when aviation was still seen as a dangerous, male-dominated pursuit. Amelia's rise to fame wasn't accidental. She embodied the spirit of the 1920s, a decade of breaking rules and redefining roles. Women had just earned the right to vote in the U.S., and Amelia's bold ventures into the skies aligned perfectly with this wave of female empowerment. Her courage didn't just inspire future pilots. It encouraged women everywhere to rethink what was possible. But Amelia wasn't only about aviation records. She was a writer, a speaker, and a relentless advocate for women in aviation. She encouraged young girls to believe that they, too, could take to the skies. With her charm, intelligence, and daring personality, she quickly became a global icon. She wasn't just a woman who flew planes. She was a symbol of the modern woman, bold, independent, and free. By the late 1920s and early 1930s, Amelia Earhart had cemented herself as one of the leading figures in aviation. But her ambitions went far beyond setting records. She wanted to do something bigger, something that would forever link her name to history. And so, with determination burning brighter than ever, Amelia began planning flights that would push both her own limits and those of aviation itself. What started as a fascination with a simple flying exhibition had evolved into a mission, not just to conquer the skies, but to prove to the world that women were capable of anything. It was this mission that propelled her into the hearts of millions and set the stage for the greatest enigma of the 20th century. By the late 1920s, Amelia Earhart had already achieved recognition in aviation circles, but her moment of global fame came in 1928. That year, she became the first woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean, not as a pilot, but as a passenger alongside Wilmer Stoltz and Lewis Gordon. Though she didn't control the aircraft during the flight, the feat brought her international acclaim. Newspapers hailed her as Lady Lindy, drawing comparisons to Charles Lindbergh, the man who had famously flown solo across the Atlantic just a year earlier. While grateful for the attention, Amelia was unsatisfied with being merely a passenger. She was determined to prove her skill as a pilot, not just as a figurehead. This determination drove her to achieve something far more ambitious 4 years later. On May 20th, 1932, Amelia Earhart made aviation history when she became the first woman to fly solo nonstop across the Atlantic. Battling freezing temperatures, exhaustion, and mechanical problems, she landed in a field in Northern Ireland after 14 grueling hours in the air. She had done it alone against all odds. The world erupted in admiration. President Herbert Hoover presented her with the Distinguished Flying Cross, the first ever awarded to a woman. More than just a personal triumph, this accomplishment shattered gender stereotypes. Amelia had not only matched the feats of male pilots, but also demonstrated courage and resilience that inspired millions worldwide. From there, her career soared. She continued breaking records. The first woman to fly nonstop coast to coast across the United States, the fastest transcontinental flight by a woman, and more. Each achievement brought her deeper into the public imagination. She became a best-selling author, lecturer, and advocate for women's rights, using her fame to campaign for greater opportunities for women in aviation. But Amelia's fame wasn't just about breaking records. It was about her personality. She was approachable, down-to-earth, and unapologetically ambitious. She wore practical trousers instead of skirts, a statement that further emphasized a rejection of traditional roles. She embodied a new era of women who were determined to carve their own destinies. Her marriage to George P. Putnam, a publisher and promoter, also played a role in her fame. Together, they carefully managed her image, ensuring that her achievements were widely publicized. Putnam was instrumental in securing sponsorships, book deals, and speaking tours. Yet Amelia remained fiercely independent in her marriage, even insisting on an unusual agreement that emphasized equality and freedom between them. Amelia Earhart was now more than a pilot. She was a cultural icon. Her courage, charisma, and drive symbolized the progress of women in society. But for Amelia, the sky was not the limit. She had her eyes set on the ultimate challenge, a flight around the globe, a feat that would test her skills and endurance like nothing before. And it was this ambition that would eventually lead her into one of history's greatest mysteries. By the mid-1930s, Amelia Earhart was not only a household name, but also a global symbol of aviation's future. She had already crossed oceans, set records, and inspired countless admirers. Yet, Amelia was not content to rest on her achievements. She wanted to push aviation to its furthest limits, to prove that the airplane could connect the world in ways never imagined before. And so, she set her sights on what she called the last great challenge, a flight around the globe. The idea of circling the world by air was still extraordinary in the 1930s. Few aviators had even attempted such a feat, and none had succeeded on the route Amelia envisioned. While others had flown around the world before, their paths were shorter, often hugging northern latitudes. Amelia wanted to take a far more ambitious course, one that stretched near the equator, covering approximately 29,000 miles. This would be the longest, most treacherous route attempted to date. If she could accomplish it, she would not just be making history. She would be carving her name into the very mythology of exploration. Her partner in this bold plan was a Lockheed Electra 10E, a sleek twin-engine aircraft that became her most trusted companion. Financed through Purdue University, where Amelia served as a faculty member and advisor to female students in careers, the Electra was outfitted specifically for long-distance flights. It carried extra fuel tanks, advanced navigation equipment, and modifications to endure the punishing journey ahead. Amelia affectionately dubbed her Flying Laboratory. But such a journey could not be undertaken alone. To support her, Amelia assembled a team of navigators and crew members. Initially, her companion was Harry Manning, a skilled navigator, but he soon withdrew from a mission. Fred Noonan, an experienced navigator with a history of guiding Pan American Airways flights across the Pacific, eventually became Amelia's right-hand man. His expertise in celestial navigation was considered invaluable, especially for the long stretches over open ocean where landmarks were non-existent. In March 1937, Amelia launched her first attempt at the world flight, heading westward from California toward Hawaii. At first, everything seemed promising, but disaster struck when the Electra was damaged during a takeoff accident in Honolulu. The plane required extensive repairs, and the mission was postponed. Though disheartened, Amelia refused to abandon her dream. She simply adjusted her plans, deciding that her second attempt would begin later that year, this time heading eastward, with Fred Noonan as her navigator. By June 1937, Amelia and Fred had embarked on their journey. They flew from California to Miami, then south through South America, across the Atlantic to Africa, and eastward to India and Southeast Asia. With each leg completed, they grew closer to their ultimate goal. By the end of June, they had already covered more than 22,000 miles. Only one daunting stretch remained, the vast Pacific Ocean, beginning with a tiny speck of Howland Island as their next critical stop. Amelia Earhart was closer than ever to fulfilling her vision. Yet, unbeknownst to her, she was also approaching the edge of history's greatest aviation mystery. The final chapter of her journey was about to begin, and would end not with triumph, but with a disappearance that still haunts the world nearly a century later. By the summer of 1937, Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan had already defied expectations, crossing continents and oceans in their pursuit of a record-breaking circumnavigation. Their Lockheed Electra 10E, the flying laboratory, had carried them across South America, Africa, India, and Southeast Asia. As they landed in Papua New Guinea on June 29th, they had traveled nearly three-quarters of the way around the world. The final obstacle was the most dangerous yet, the Pacific Ocean. From their next destination was Howland Island, a tiny speck of land in the Central Pacific. At just 2 miles long and less than a mile wide, Howland was barely visible even under the best conditions. For Amelia and Fred, reaching it required pinpoint navigation over 2,500 miles of open water. One small miscalculation could mean missing the island entirely, and in the vastness of the Pacific, such a mistake would be fatal. The U.S. Coast Guard prepared to assist in the critical flight. The cutter Itasca was stationed near Howland to provide radio communication and directional signals. The plan was straightforward in theory. Amelia would maintain contact with the Itasca, use its radio signals to guide her approach, and then land safely on Howland's airstrip. But in practice, the situation was riddled with uncertainties. Communication technology in 1937 was primitive compared to today's standards, and Amelia had limited experience with radio navigation. Fred Noonan, while skilled in celestial navigation, faced difficulties because overcast skies often obscured the stars. On July 2, 1937, at 10 a.m. local time, Amelia and Fred departed from The Electra was heavily loaded with fuel, enough for approximately 20 hours of flight. As they climbed into the sky, they carried not only their hopes but the expectations of millions around the world. If successful, they would complete one of the most ambitious aviation feats ever attempted. Throughout the day, Amelia sent position reports to and attempted to contact the Itasca. At first, communication seemed steady. She reported clear skies, favorable winds, and steady progress. But as the hours wore on, signals became faint and difficult to interpret. The Itasca struggled to hear Amelia's transmissions, and she seemed unable to receive their replies. The radio equipment, already known to be temperamental, became a lifeline fraying in the middle of the Pacific. As the Electra neared Howland, anxiety mounted. Amelia's transmissions grew more urgent. She reported that she was flying on a line north and south, a cryptic phrase suggesting that she and Fred were running search patterns near where they believed Howland should be. The Itasca desperately sent out smoke signals and constant radio calls, but Amelia never acknowledged them. Fuel reserves dwindled with every passing minute. Then, at 8:43 a.m. local time, her final message crackled over the airwaves. "We are on the line 157 to 337. We will repeat this message on 6,210 kilocycles." Wait. And then silence. The Electric never arrived at Howland. No further signals were received. Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan had vanished into the Pacific void, leaving behind one of history's greatest mysteries. When Amelia Earhart's last radio call faded into silence on July 2nd, 1937, the world held its breath. News of her disappearance spread quickly, sparking a frenzy of concern and speculation. She was not just any aviator. She was the most famous woman in the world, a symbol of progress, courage, and modernity. Her vanishing was unthinkable, and it demanded immediate action. The U.S. government responded with unprecedented urgency. President Franklin D. Roosevelt himself authorized a massive search and rescue mission, the largest air and sea operation ever conducted up to that time. Within hours, the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Itasca, which had been waiting at Howland Island, began combing the waters where Amelia was last thought to be. They scanned the horizon, searching desperately for signs of the Electra, debris, or survivors. But the vastness of the Pacific quickly became apparent. Finding a small aircraft or life raft in those waters was like looking for a needle in a haystack the size of a continent. Soon, the U.S. Navy joined the effort. The aircraft carrier USS Lexington and the battleship USS Colorado, along with dozens of planes and support vessels, were dispatched to scour nearly 250,000 square miles of ocean. Pilots flew in tight search patterns, scanning endless waves for even the faintest clue. Ships dragged their lookouts to exhaustion, peering into the watery horizon. Every possible lead was followed, every radio transmission monitored, and yet nothing. No wreckage, no oil slicks, no sign of Amelia or Fred. The Pacific kept its secrets well. The search revealed just how perilous the flight had been. Despite the careful planning, Amelia's communication setup was flawed. She had not been fully trained on the nuances of radio navigation, and her Electra lacked some key equipment that might have made finding Howland easier. Even worse, the weather that day may have interfered with her ability to pick up the Itasca signals. In short, Amelia and Fred were flying blind in one of the most dangerous expanses of ocean on Earth. The official search lasted 2 weeks, costing nearly $4 million, a staggering sum in Depression-era America. When the Navy and Coast Guard finally withdrew, they had nothing to show for their efforts. Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan had vanished without a trace, as if swallowed whole by the sea. For Amelia's husband, George Putnam, the aftermath was agonizing. He refused to give up hope, funding his own private search efforts after the government ended theirs. He chased rumors, followed up on unconfirmed radio signals, and even commissioned private expeditions to nearby islands. Still, no evidence emerged. Eventually, with no answers and no leads, Amelia Earhart was declared legally dead in January 1939. But the mystery did not die with her. Instead, it grew larger. The absence of wreckage or human remains opened the door to speculation, theories, and myths. Some believed Amelia crashed into the ocean and sank immediately. Others thought she and Fred might have survived, landing on a remote island. A few whispered of darker possibilities: capture, espionage, or secret missions gone wrong. The official search had ended, but the legend of Amelia Earhart's disappearance had only just begun. In the wake of Amelia Earhart's disappearance, the world was left with a haunting question. What happened in those final hours over the Pacific? Without wreckage or survivors, speculation began almost immediately. 3 main theories dominated the early discussions: that Amelia and Fred had crashed into the ocean, that they had landed on a remote island, or that something even more mysterious had taken place. The simplest and most widely accepted explanation was a crash and sink theory. According to this view, Amelia simply ran out of fuel while searching for Howland Island. With the vast Pacific beneath them and no land in sight, the Electra would plunge into the ocean. This theory seemed logical. Amelia's final transmissions indicated she was uncertain of her location, and fuel reserves were running low. If true, the plane likely sank quickly in waters that reached depths of nearly 18,000 feet, an abyss that could easily conceal wreckage for centuries. The absence of debris during the Navy's massive search seemed to support this grim conclusion, but others doubted that explanation. They pointed to unverified radio distress signals that were reportedly heard in the days following Amelia's disappearance. Amateur radio operators claimed to have picked up faint messages believed to be Amelia's voice calling for help. Some of these signals were dismissed as hoaxes or misinterpretations, but few were intriguing enough that even the Navy briefly considered them. If Amelia had indeed sent distress calls, it suggested she and Fred may have survived the landing, perhaps not in the ocean, but on land. This possibility gave rise to the Gardner Island theory, later known as the Nicomaroro hypothesis. Gardner Island, now called Nicomaroro, part of the Phoenix Islands, lay within the possible navigational range of Amelia's last reported position. If she missed Howland, it's conceivable she and Fred turned southward, searching for another landmass. Nicomaroro, though remote and uninhabited at the time, had a flat reef surface where the Electra could theoretically have landed. Proponents of this theory argue that Amelia and Fred may have survived for days, or even weeks, before succumbing to hunger, thirst, or injury. Decades later, reports of skeletal remains and artifacts found on Nicomaroro fueled this speculation further, though no conclusive link to Amelia has ever been proven. Then there were the more extraordinary claims that Amelia was captured by the Japanese. This spy or prisoner theory suggested that Amelia's flight wasn't just about aviation. It was part of a covert reconnaissance mission for the U.S. government. According to this theory, she was forced down near the Marshall Islands, then under Japanese control, and taken prisoner along with Fred. Supporters claimed locals later recalled seeing a tall white woman in custody. Some even alleged Amelia was executed, while others believed she survived under a new identity. For many, these theories stretched the limits of credibility, yet they reflected a profound refusal to accept the idea that Amelia, a hero and icon, could vanish without explanation. As the years passed, the lack of evidence kept all possibilities alive, and each theory gained its own loyal following. The mystery of Amelia Earhart was no longer just about aviation. It had become a canvas for imagination, patriotism, and conspiracy. But whether she sank quietly into the Pacific or met a stranger fate elsewhere, one thing was certain. The world was not ready to let her go. As World War II reshaped the globe, Amelia Earhart's disappearance took on new meaning. By the 1940s, speculation had shifted from tragic accident to intrigue and espionage. One of the most enduring theories claimed that Amelia had been captured by the Japanese military in the Pacific, turning her into an unwitting pawn in the tense politics of the era. The seeds of this theory were planted by geography. Amelia's intended route to Howland Island put her within striking distance of the Marshall Islands, then controlled by Japan. If she had missed Howland and flown north or west instead, it was conceivable she might have reached those islands. For Americans wary of Japanese expansion in the Pacific, the idea that their beloved aviator had fallen into enemy hands struck a chord. Stories soon surfaced. Some residents of the Marshall Islands later claimed they had seen a white woman and a man, both foreigners, in Japanese custody during the late 1930s. These accounts described the pair as tall, Western, and out of place, possibly Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan. According to some versions, they were suspected spies, imprisoned, and eventually executed. Others said they perished in captivity, while few insisted they survived under false identities. The rumor mill was fed by U.S. servicemen returning from the Pacific during and after World War II. Some claimed to have heard second-hand stories from locals, while others swore they had seen evidence themselves. One tale described a photograph showing Amelia alive on a dock in the Marshall Islands, guarded by Japanese soldiers. Another insisted that Amelia had been taken to Saipan, where she allegedly died in prison. Each story added fuel to conspiracy, though none were ever substantiated with verifiable proof. American intelligence documents released decades later did little to calm the speculation. Some declassified files hinted at intercepted communications, mentioning American flyers in the Pacific. Though never directly linked to Amelia, these vague references stoked suspicion that the U.S. government might have known more than it revealed. Critics of the official crash and sink explanation argued that Amelia's celebrity status would have made her disappearance too politically significant to dismiss without thorough investigation. Why, they asked, would such a massive search fail to uncover anything at all? Was something being hidden? For conspiracy theorists, the pieces fit together neatly. Amelia's flight was not merely a civilian adventure, but a reconnaissance mission disguised as a record attempt. Her Electra may have been used to gather intelligence on Japanese bases, and when she strayed too close, she was captured to protect diplomatic relations or perhaps military secrets. The truth was buried, yet mainstream historians remain skeptical. While eyewitness accounts are compelling, memory is unreliable, and no physical evidence has ever emerged to confirm Amelia was in Japanese custody. The infamous dock photograph, once touted as proof, was later debunked as being taken years before her flight. Still, the prisoner theory endures. It captures the imagination because it suggests Amelia's disappearance was not a tragic accident, but a geopolitical mystery wrapped in wartime secrecy. And perhaps more importantly, it offers a narrative in which Amelia's courage outlasted her flight. A woman trapped by forces larger than herself, yet still at the center of history's gaze. Decades after Amelia Earhart's disappearance, her mystery still loomed large. With every passing generation, the urge to solve it only grew stronger. Beginning in the latter half of the 20th century, scientists, explorers, and historians launched renewed efforts to find tangible evidence of her fate. Unlike the speculation of earlier years, these modern searches lean heavily on technology, archaeology, and forensic science. One of the most famous efforts was led by the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, or TIRE. Beginning in the late 1980s, TIRE championed the Chamorro theory, the idea that Amelia and Fred Noonan had landed on Gardner Island and perished there as castaways. Expeditions to the remote atoll uncovered tantalizing clues: remnant of a woman's shoe from the 1930s, fragment of aluminum possibly matching the Electra, and, most controversially, skeletal remains. In 1940, British colonial officers on Gardner Island reported finding human bones, along with a sexton box and parts of a woman's shoe. The remains were shipped to Fiji, where a doctor examined them and concluded they belonged to a man. Those bones later disappeared, vanishing into history. But modern researchers reanalyzed the doctor's original measurements decades later using computer modeling. To their surprise, the analysis suggested the bones may have actually belonged to a tall Caucasian woman, someone remarkably similar to Amelia. Unfortunately, without the bones themselves, the case remained circumstantial. Meanwhile, the ocean continued to tempt others. The crash and sink camp turned to deep-sea exploration. Using sonar, submersibles, and advanced imaging, search teams combed the seafloor near Howland Island. The most famous of these was conducted by ocean explorer Robert Ballard, who had discovered the Titanic. In 2019, Ballard launched an expedition around Howland and Nkomororo, mapping the seabed for signs of the Electra. Despite weeks of searching, his team found nothing definitive: no engines, no fuselage, no wreckage. Yet Ballard himself admitted the ocean was so vast and deep that failure to find evidence did not rule the theory out. Other modern discoveries added new intrigue. In the early 2000s, researchers identified rusty pieces of metal on Nkomororo's reef that some believe matched repairs Amelia's Electra had undergone before her world flight. There were even reports of improvised tools made from aircraft parts. But skeptics countered that shipwreck debris could easily have washed up on the atoll, confusing the record. Even technology couldn't close the case. Satellite imagery, underwater drones, and forensic testing advanced the search, but all evidence remained circumstantial. Without a definitive wreck site, DNA sample, or identifiable artifact directly tied to Amelia, certainty remained elusive. Still, these modern hunts demonstrated the enduring pull of Amelia Earhart's story. Decades later, teams were willing to spend millions and brave unforgiving seas simply for a chance to answer the question that had haunted the world since 1937. Each fragment discovered kept hope alive that the Electra, or Amelia herself, might one day be found. And yet, every failed expedition also deepened the mystery. The Pacific continued to guard its secrets well. Amelia's fate remained just out of reach, balanced precariously between science and legend. Amelia Earhart's disappearance was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of her legend. More than 8 decades later, her name is spoken not only as a pioneering aviator, but as a symbol of daring, independence, and the eternal quest for discovery. Her cultural legacy extends far beyond aviation. She had become an icon of women's empowerment, a figure invoked in classrooms, books, and films as proof that courage knows no gender and that boundaries exist only to be crossed. Her disappearance in 1937 created a void, one that the human imagination eagerly filled. Without answers, people turned to myth. For some, she became a martyred progress, an explorer who gave her life in the pursuit of knowledge. For others, she was transformed into a mysterious figure, said to have lived secretly on Pacific Islands, or even under an assumed identity after the war. The truth mattered less than the story itself. Amelia became a canvas upon which generations projected their hopes, fears, and fascination with the unknown. In the decades following her vanishing, her image was enshrined in literature and popular culture. Biographies cast her as both tragic heroine and feminist trailblazer. Filmmakers dramatized her final flight, often blurring fact with speculation. Her face, sharp-eyed and determined beneath her signature flying cap, became one of the most recognizable portraits of the 20th century. Even in music and art, Amelia appeared as a muse, a reminder of both human fragility and indomitable spirit. Her legacy also sparked lasting change. For young women in the mid-20th century, Amelia was proof that ambition could break ceilings of custom and convention. She had stepped into a male-dominated sky and claimed it as her own. In classrooms, her story encouraged generations to chase dreams that seemed impossible, to push past the limits society placed upon them. The mystery of her final flight only deepened her cultural impact. Had she simply retired quietly after a career of record-breaking flights, her place in history would still have been secure. But vanishing into the vast Pacific transformed her into something larger than life, a figure caught between history and legend, memory and myth. Amelia Earhart became immortal not only for what she achieved, but for what we may never know. Her legacy endures as both inspiration and cautionary tale. She reminds us that progress requires risk, that ambition carries peril, and that the pursuit of greatness often leaves behind unanswered questions. In Amelia's case, the greatest question of all, what became of her, remains unanswered, ensuring her place in history as one of its most enduring mysteries. As we step back from the search grids, the sonar scans, and the countless theories, one thing becomes clear. Amelia Earhart's story is more than a historical mystery. It's a mirror reflecting humanity's restless desire to explore. Her final flight across the Pacific may have ended in silence, but the echoes of her ambition continue to reverberate across generations. In the centuries since her disappearance, Amelia has become more than a pioneering aviator. She has become a cultural beacon. Her name is spoken in the same breath as other explorers who pushed against the limits of human possibility. Unlike many of them, her legend is amplified not by what we know, but by what we do not. The unanswered question of her fate has given her a timeless quality. She exists, suspended in history, never quite gone, never fully found. Modern expeditions have brought us closer than ever to possible answers. Satellite imagery, DNA testing, and advanced maritime technology have all been employed in hopes of resolving the mystery. Each expedition brings tantalizing fragments, metal scraps, bone fragments, or eyewitness accounts, but no definitive proof. And perhaps that is part of the fascination. The search for Amelia is not only about solving a disappearance, but about humanity's yearning to close the gap between the known and the unknown. But whether or not her final resting place is ever discovered, Amelia's true legacy is already secure. She shattered the glass ceiling of her era, proving that skill, courage, and ambition were not bound by gender. She inspired women to take the skies, to enter fields once closed them, and to demand recognition, not as novelties but as equals. Every female pilot, astronaut, or explorer who takes a bold step forward walks in the shadow of Amelia's trailblazing wings. The enduring enigma of Amelia Earhart is thus twofold. She is both a historical puzzle and a symbol. On one hand, her disappearance continues to challenge investigators, fueling debates and expeditions nearly a century later. On the other, her life, her courage, her voice, her relentless determination remains a guiding light, inspiring those who dare to dream beyond the horizon. As long as the Pacific whispers with unanswered questions, Amelia Earhart's story will endure. And maybe that is fitting, for explorers like Amelia are never meant to be confined to a single place or time. They live on in imagination, urging us to look upward, outward, and forward, reminding us that the spirit of discovery is eternal. Her final chapter remains unwritten. But in every way that matters, Amelia Earhart's legacy has already taken flight, soaring far beyond the clouds she once called home. If you enjoyed uncovering the mystery of Amelia Earhart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Crit Stories for more journeys into history's darkest secrets. Hit the bell icon so you never miss our next deep dive.